Researchers found that no patients under the age of 12 were prescribed hormones.
You've got people like Riley J. Dennis going to Australia and breaking women's legs in like women's football.
Just to be extremely clear, and I apologize if I'm not saying her name right, but Amani Khalif, she's a woman. She's a cis woman.
Being yet another mouthpiece for journalists. It's the same thing Vorsh does, Luxander does. Taking like Erin in the Morning articles and social media posts and just amplifying them. Say, well, they burn books and these people are banning books. That doesn't mean they're the same.
It's absurd. And I think that if the right-wing grifters were to honestly confront this stuff, it would make all of their arguments seem incredibly stupid.
What right-wing grifters has this person ever spoken to? You're never going to understand the other side by reading media like this. It doesn't work. And if you're never going to understand the other side, how are you going to go up against it? If there's only 0.1% of a population stealing, does that mean they should just ignore stealing?
Why am I dancing with that trans person?
Anyway, I want to move on. We got trans, progressive. This is Leah Passaniti. This is someone, like, I saw them as like a new channel. They seem to have like climbed a lot quicker than me, which fair enough, you know. You know what you're doing, you can do that. I do not know what I'm doing, like, whatsoever. Like 6 months ago, like another progressive YouTuber, but why? Like, I want to give this person the benefit of the doubt, but I very much think they are just another trans progressive YouTuber. Like, there is little I've seen to it. But hey, I always give people the benefit of the doubt for some reason. Is anyone going to stand up to Trump's insanity? Let's see if anyone has any original stuff to say about the Trump stuff, or whether this is going to be the same video that I watched yesterday with Counselor Geeks. Let's have a look.
Why, hello there, and welcome to this video. Since Trump has taken office, I've been focusing my efforts on covering the slew of executive orders that Trump has signed, targeting the LGBTQ community as a whole, and primarily transgender individuals. Now, I do think that this is important. I think we need to stay up to date and informed on what's going on, because this stuff really does matter, and it will have impacts on people's lives, negative impacts. It will hurt people. And for that reason, we need to know what's going on. We need to stay up to date. But at the same time, I've noticed that a lot of people are covering these horrible executive orders, and they're covering the bad things that could happen due to these executive orders. There are not a lot of people covering the follow-up and like talking about what's happening since these executive orders have been signed and like what kind of challenges have been levied against them. I've actually had people in my comment sections incorrectly believe that these are bills signed into law, or that these things will go into effect with absolutely no challenge and there's nothing that we can do. It's just like the way things
Yeah, people are panicking.
are now. But this is not true. He has only been able to do things using executive order because, you know, to get something passed through the Senate, like a bill, he would need 60 votes in the Senate, and they're not going to get that kind of vote count with hateful legislation. And so he's really utilizing these executive orders, kind of like spreading them out so that they're not all happening at once. It's kind of like a steady stream of executive orders that seem to target individuals. And I think that the point of
Target individuals? No, none of them are targeting individuals. I don't know how you'd make that kind of claim, quite honestly. If it's targeting an individual, it would name individuals, no?
of that is to make everyone afraid, to make everyone unsure of what the future is going to be like, unsure of what they can do to stop this. And
Wait, did they say 500,000 casualties in Gaza? Like, Jesus Christ.
to kind of just force people into complacency out of fear. But there are avenues of resistance, not only everyone afraid, to make everyone orders that seem to target individuals. And I think that the point
We're conspiracy theorizing already, listen.
is kind of like a steady stream of executive orders that seem to target individuals. And I think that the point of that is to make everyone afraid, to make everyone unsure of what the future is going to be like.
You think this is what the point of it is? I think the point of it is that he feels that a lot of this stuff has gone too far. That we've got trans women entering women's sports, which doesn't seem right to an awful lot of people, because males are generally stronger and better at sports than women. Like women's prisons being able to claim all kinds of legal protections and stuff like that. Why? Because you identify as something. I don't know, man. Should you be able to? But we have to like conspiracy theorize. I would love to see any of these progressives at least actually try and understand where it's coming from instead of just conspiracy theorizing. And the problem is, this seems to be how you get the views if you want to be a trans progressive. It's not about thinking. It's not about, like, look at this. All these orders are merely grandstanding, designed to instill fear and anxiety. What is this based on? What is this based on? You're like just making stuff up. Why aren't these TRAs running down on Trump like they do TERFs? Well, for all I know, maybe they do on like Twitter and stuff. I don't know if they DM people like Trump on social media. But the other thing is Trump is a lot less touchable, you know what I mean? Like some random TERF on Twitter with like 5,000 followers or whatever. They're a lot more easily reached.
Unsure of what they can do to stop this, and to kind of just force people into complacency out of fear. But there are avenues of resistance. Not only could a future president rescind all of this bullcrap and just kind of put us back in a good place, not only that, but these are executive orders that can be challenged in court and blocked by judges. Not only that, but these executive orders also have to be enforced by people. Like there are people that have to hand down the directives for these executive orders. So like the one targeting school systems, for example, if you have people in positions of power that are, agreeable towards queer folk in general, they will likely put up a fight against this stuff. So what I wanted to do today is go over the resistance that we are seeing to these executive orders and sort of like the fallout from these executive orders, like what has taken effect, what hasn't taken effect, what's being challenged, what isn't being challenged, that kind of stuff. I want to give kind of an idea for people as to like how this stuff has shaken out, because I just am worried that a lot of people are hearing about these executive orders and they're thinking like, well, that's it for us. Like we're cooked and we are in danger and these things will hurt people and there will be repercussions. But I just want to make it very clear that it's not as bad as Trump wants it to be. So with no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the first article. We have a bunch of articles to go over today. So I'm
72 viewers, only 34 likes. Listen, some of y'all gotta sort that out. You know what I mean? You gotta scroll down. You see, if you're on a computer, it might look like this. You click this button here, or if you're on your mobile, you press the like button. Takes but 2 seconds, if that. Make sure you check the links in my description as well. You can super chat, support me financially, or you can check out some music that I've made. You can either buy or stream that or whatever. Let's keep going.
I'm going to try to not spend too much time on each one. I'm going to try to move through them sort of in a timely manner. So first of all, I just want to go ahead and read this article right here. Trump's anti-trans effort is an agenda corner.
Okay, so we're reading an extremely biased article. OPB. What is this? I don't recognize this news source. Oregon Public Broadcasting. I guess it makes immediate sense as to why this is a biased source. But the problem is, straight away, it seems like this person is getting very biased information. So like, in a certain sense, it's like, well, yeah, they're going to repeat what it is that they're reading. But what is they're reading is that this is anti-trans stuff, you know what I mean? Like straight away, framing it in a certain way, which is leading. So like, you kind of f***ing yourself before you even begin. You're never going to understand the other side by reading media like this. It doesn't work. And if you're never going to understand the other side, how are you going to go up against it? You want to talk about resistance. How do you resist something you don't understand? It doesn't make any sense.
Cornerstone with echoes in history. Hours after an Army helicopter and an American Airlines jet collided near Reagan National Airport last week, all on board both craft, social media erupted with the claim that the pilot manning the Black Hawk was a transgender service member.
Yeah, didn't they say it was like misreported or something? I don't know where the report comes from.
But it wasn't true. Joe Ellis, a transgender Black Hawk pilot with the Virginia National Guard, took to Facebook to post proof of life and to rebuke the false accusations about her. It is insulting to the families to try to tie this to some sort of political agenda, Ellis said in an online post. They don't deserve that. I don't deserve this. Ellis did not respond to an interview request from NPR, but her experience is just the latest in a pattern where Republican leaders and high-reach social media accounts scapegoat transgender people in the way.
Scapegoat transgender people?
Is just the latest in a pattern where Republican leaders and high-reach social media accounts.
High-reach social media accounts. We're tying in Republican like lawmakers with like high-reach social media accounts. Who was it that was going around like blaming it on this person? Is it like, this just seems a bit weird. It's a very weird way of putting it. This doesn't really have anything to do with the government. It sounds like crazy people on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, saying dumb shit.
Scapegoat transgender people in the wake of high-profile tragedies. Similar false claims were made about perpetrators of mass shootings in Texas, Georgia, Wisconsin, and Iowa. For extremism experts and some within the trans community, the accusations speak to a highly dangerous political strategy to sow division and expand authoritarian control. The emergence of a political strategy. On Wednesday afternoon, President Trump signed the latest in a series of executive orders concerning transgender Americans, which aims to ban transgender women from participating in women's sports. In his comments before signing the
Yeah, that's a good thing.
order, Trump repeatedly referred
Why didn't these people ever actually talk about how they feel about like women's sports? You know what I mean?
to these athletes as men posing as women. He declared that the measure would effectively end an attack on female athletes at public K-12 schools and virtually all U.S. colleges and universities. Other initiatives of the current administration aim to curtail, among other things, trans people's access to bathrooms, medical care, and legal documents that reflect their gender identity. In his comments before signing the order on sports participation, Trump repeated the lie that 2024 Olympics gold medal women's boxer Amani Khalif is a man and asserted that transgender women beat and batter female athletes. Just to be extremely clear, and I apologize if I'm not saying her name right, but Amani Khalif, she's a woman. She's a cis woman.
Is that true? How do you know? There's evidence to the contrary. Several different sources from, like, we had the IBA. They had her tested in Turkey and India, suggesting she had XY chromosomes, most likely 5ARD. There was another medical report that was leaked in France. It is not confirmed that this person is a cis woman. It probably never will be.
So this lie has been perpetuated to an extent
You don't know whether it's a lie or not because you don't actually know the truth on this.
where the president of the United States believes that she was a transgender athlete when she literally was.
Yeah, she wasn't a transgender athlete, that's true, and he's a bit of a fucking moron for saying that. I think I saw that very thing. He's wrong there. But you don't know that this person is a cisgender woman. Why is it that when it's someone like Iman Khalif, we know for a fact that they're a cisgender woman, but whenever it comes to like trans women, oh, you don't know what their chromosomes are. You don't know what they are. It's like, it's a bit cringe, no? There's a bit of a double standard here.
So if you think that this stuff is literally only hurting the trans community or the LGBTQ community, you're wrong. Cis people get wrapped up in this stuff all the time. Transvestigations are things that hurt cisgender people. So I just want to make it very clear that
Do they? How so?
this stuff is not just going to lash out at.
That isn't a good example because there's actually evidence to believe that Iman Khalif isn't actually female. You know what I mean? There's evidence out there that they might have XY chromosomes, might have something like 5ARD, which means that you're male, not female.
The trans community, it's also going to hurt other people as well. There's a ton of terrible claims saying that things like puberty blockers or hormone replacement therapy is somehow causing aggression or violence in transgender and gender nonconforming people, said Sarah Moore, a senior manager of news and research at GLAAD, which is an advocacy organization, which we know to be completely contrary to the medical science behind these treatments. Moore said that the mischaracterization of transgender people as dangerous to society also lies behind a now predictable response to national tragedies. Incorrect claims surfaced quickly after mass shootings in Uvalde, Texas, Appalachia, Georgia, Houston, Texas, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Lakewood, Texas, and Madison, Wisconsin, asserting that the perpetrators were transgender. Among those amplifying these incorrect narratives were Republican members of Congress. Another trans shooter tweeted Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia after the 2023 Philadelphia rampage, which left 5 people dead. In the aftermath of a mass shooting at a church in Lakewood, Texas in 2024, Senator Joshua Hawley of Missouri tweeted, "So the Lakewood church shooter was a transgender pro-Palestine radical." And in a tweet that was later deleted,
Palestine, that's a new one. Listen, if they are like saying that people are trans when they're not, that's cringe. I don't agree with that at all. Like, I'm not really a right-winger myself.
Representative Paul Gosar of Arizona laid the blame for the 2022 killing of 19 students and 2 teachers at a Uvalde, Texas elementary school on a transsexual, leftist, illegal alien. In all of these cases, the claims were false. While there have been a few instances where mass shootings were committed by transgender or non-binary people, analyses have found these cases to be rare, and most mass shootings are carried out by cisgender men. In fact, Moore said
You notice how when it's on the other foot, they seem very happy about it, don't they?
these cases to be rare, and most mass shootings are carried out by cisgender.
Listen, not a fan of this, to be honest. Like, are you not kind of just doing the same thing in reverse? Like, you seem to want to pin things on groups of people. Cisgender men is an incredibly large group of people. Like, is it fair to, like, highlight it in this way?
Men. In fact, Moore said that the data collected by GLAAD show that transgender people in the US are 4 times more likely.
Like, maybe this is true, but it's the way you want to pin it on someone that way. You know what I mean? It's just not, I don't vibe with it, man.
To be the victims of crimes than the perpetrators. Nonetheless, unfounded characterizations of transgender people as terrorists, groomers, or mentally unwell have accelerated in recent years, as have state and federal policies aiming at restricting trans rights. What is happening here is that people are demonizing trans people in order to gain power and privilege, said Lauren Cannon, a teacher of philosophy at Cal Poly Humboldt. Cannon explored the past decade's growing anti-trans campaign for his book, The Politicization of Trans Identity, an analysis of backlash, scapegoating, and dog whistling from Obergefell to Bostock. Cannon, who is trans, said that it rarely matters whether anti-trans bills succeed or fail. Either way, he said, they appear to benefit the politicians who promote them. Where fear of trans people and demonization of trans people has been stoked, if a politician were to simply introduce anti-transgender legislation and it doesn't pass, they still have the bragging rights to say, listen, radical gender ideology is harming our nation in a variety of different ways. I'm your politician. I'm your person to fight back about that, Cannon said. In 2020, 85 trans-related bills were considered across the U.S., according to data collected by the Trans Legislation is harming our nation in a variety of different ways. They still have the bragging rights to say, listen, radical gender ideology trans people and demonization of trans people has been stoked. If a politician were to simply introduce anti-transgender legislation and it doesn't pass, they still have the bragging rights to say, listen, radical gender ideology is harming our nation in a variety of different
Like the bragging rights, like they have an opinion on this shit. Like, what is this framing? I don't know who's writing these articles. They clearly have a bee in their bonnet.
ways. I'm your politician. I'm your person to fight back about that, Cannon said. In 2020, 85 trans-related bills were considered across the U.S., according to data collected by the Trans Legislation Tracker, an organization that monitors measures affecting the trans community.
Yeah, these trackers, they always compile a huge amount of things, half of which, like trans people aren't even going to be unified on anyway, because plenty of trans people aren't down with, like, transitioning children. Plenty of trans people are not down with other trans people entering female sports. So it's really a bullshit argument. You have to look at the actual bills, and you have to acknowledge the fact that most of them won't pass anyway.
By 2024, that had grown to more than 670. According to Andrew Bales, founder of Trans Legislation Tracker, 15 of those had Democratic sponsors. The rest were brought by Republican legislators, often under the auspices of protecting women, children, or female athletes.
Under the auspices, but, like, you have to argue against that. Quite often, that is kind of what they're doing, no? The problem is, you'll never talk about any of these in specifics. So it's kind of hard. It's like, well, in general, maybe they are aimed at, like, protecting women, but you never engage on those terms. It's quite frustrating, and I have a feeling this person's going to keep reading instead of engaging as to why that isn't. Big number, but what consequences have actually materialized? The other thing is, if you dig into them, plenty of them are, like, the kind of things that trans people aren't in unison on anyway. So how can you call them, like, anti-trans? Like, if something's anti-trans, shouldn't it, like, very, very squarely be aimed at bringing down trans people and nothing else? I don't understand that at all. Like, it's clear that they use these big numbers and bring in anything tangentially related to trans people, even if it's something that plenty of trans people would agree with, and just call it anti-trans en masse. We're aiming, like, bigotry at a bigger and bigger and bigger group of things where bigotry doesn't actually apply. And that's the overall, that's the overall point of these kind of political projects, I feel. These compiling of bills that they can then say, well, we've got this many anti-trans bills, this many anti-trans bills. It's like, well, have you actually looked at any of them? Have you been honest about the success failure rate, which is normally not many of them pass, you know what I mean? Some of them you get are, like, literally pretty fucking redundant. Like some of these, like, military bans that kind of seems like trans people are almost entirely precluded anyway, like if they've been medicalized or anything. And then we'll get people saying, oh, it's like you're making trans people into second-class citizens by not allowing them into the military and stuff. When there's so many other conditions, so many other medical problems that preclude you as well. It's an incredibly dishonest thing, and it's a pain in the ass to, like, deal with. You know what I mean? Because these people only ever use it in abstract anyway. So, I don't know, maybe I can just shoot it down in abstract. Well, plenty of these things have got nothing to do with being anti-trans. It's about making sure women aren't losing their rights because of trans. You know what I mean?
This is part, ultimately, of a scapegoating effort that is really an authoritarian strategy.
Yeah, it's actually a scapegoating effort. So there's no way it can be about actually protecting women. Yeah. You've got people like Riley J. Dennis going to Australia and breaking women's legs in, like, women's football. You've got, was it that Peyton McNabb that had a ball spiked in her face by a male person that paralyzed her or something? You've got more and more trans athletes. You see them in, like, college events and stuff like that, streaming ahead of the competition. There doesn't seem to be any care for, like, fairness and stuff like that. So we're just taking it en masse and then saying, this is the conclusion. It's all scapegoating and shit like that, when you haven't actually analyzed any of it whatsoever.
To sow disinformation, to sow dissent, and to expand power, said Elizabeth.
Yeah, this is the disinformation. You've only ever talked about these bills en masse. You haven't discussed any of them. So, like, I don't know, man. When you're making very broad points and then saying, this broad thing is all about scapegoating, this broad thing is all about bigotry, well, you haven't done any level of analysis to come to that conclusion. You just looked at the thing in abstract, and then there it is. You know what I mean?
Elizabeth Yates, program director of the Momentum team at Western States Center, a civil rights organization based in the Pacific Northwest. This is part of a larger project. Echoes in history. The intensity of the Trump administration.
This is complete, what's the word? Conspiracy theories.
Administration's focus on one marginalized group is raising alarm among extremist experts who note that trans people make up less than 1% of adults in the US. It's ushering in a new era of effort.
Extremist experts. That just makes me wary all by itself. Extremist experts. I wonder if there's a particular kind of extremist that they always focus on, you know what I mean? Do they care much about all these like fucking radical communists in trans rallies holding up flags with fucking oppressive symbols on them? Supporting regimes that killed millions.
Towards segregation in our society, said Hannah Stuyvesant, Associate Director of Democracy Protection at Human Rights First, a nonpartisan nonprofit organization. It's incredibly dangerous. Stuyvesant said the politicization of trans people has troubling historical precedent. One of the first trans health clinics in the world was...
Well, the problem is, did we not kind of politicize ourselves first? Did we not kind of position ourselves against someone? And now we're getting shit from those people. A huge problem is the fact that we kind of tied the trans thing so inextricably to far left shit. It just doesn't work.
Was in pre-World War II Germany. It was the Institute for Sexual Research in Berlin, she said, and it was one of the very first targets of the rising Nazi Party. Nazi youth ransacked the institute in May 1933 and burned...
This is guilt by association.
Tens of thousands of books from its library. It was used as an easy target to rally support to their political ideology and to escalate the forms of violence that society found acceptable, said Stuyvesant.
Used as an easy target. Fucking Hitler wanted to do a lot of things to a lot of different people, man. Like, what is this? And what has it got to do with Trump? Like, do we have to mention Hitler in every single article about Trump? I don't understand. It's called guilt by association. It's this assumption that history repeats itself in this way when we're living in a very different time to Nazi Germany. You don't live in a country that's similar to Nazi Germany.
What I see currently happening in the United States is the same strategy. Already,
you see what I mean? Because these people did this and I'm calling it scapegoating. And now this person is doing this and I'm calling that scapegoating. Therefore, it's the same thing. The logic is insane.
Yates said that corralling popular opinion against trans identities in the U.S. has opened the door to other forms of bigotry. She pointed at efforts to ban books dealing with gender and sexuality from schools and public libraries. Over time...
Yeah, but you don't know why they're doing this. Why are they doing this versus why were the Nazis burning books? You know what I mean? Why is it the same? You have to show it's the same. Otherwise, what you're doing is guilt by association. What you're doing is fallacious.
A much larger proportion of banned books were ones written by authors of color or featured characters of color. So I thought this was a pretty good article. To ban books dealing with gender and sexuality from schools and public libraries. Over time, a much larger proportion of banned books were ones written by authors of color or featured characters of color. So I thought...
I would need to look into that. But like, there is a precedent. Like, we've got these books that are putting kids, like ideas in kids' heads, you know what I mean? It was particularly targeted because Hirschfeld was Jewish. You could say it was primarily motivated by anti-Semitism. Yeah, exactly. Like, how are we going to make the same kind of claim? It's a very lazy comparison. It's very easy to look at two different things and compare them because they're similar. Shallowly, you know what I mean? Just look at the basic facts and not actually drill down in any of it. Not actually understand the ideology behind either of those things. Does this person understand Nazism whatsoever? Does the person writing this understand Nazism whatsoever? And yeah. Like you're right, Amy. Like, they're banning them from school libraries. It's not the same as like burning things. And when you look at the actual things that they're banning from like school libraries, they're teaching kids some pretty warped ideas about like sex and gender that arguably they don't need to know at that age, that they're having ideas put in their head before they're really ready to understand them. But this person's analysis, like, this is extremely shallow analysis that they're reading. Like, they mention the anti-trans bills in abstract. They mention Nazism to say, well, they burn books and these people are banning books. That doesn't mean they're the same. You have to really do a lot more work to actually show that. And I think this person, unfortunately, is just eating up wholesale, which sucks. Like, I don't know, being yet another mouthpiece for shitty journalists. It's the same thing Vorsh does, Luxander does, taking like Erin in the Morning articles and social media posts and just amplifying them, not giving a fuck to actually think for themselves and actually do the analysis required to make any fucking sense. Banning books, is practically impossible. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know.
I thought this was a pretty good article. I think that it does a good job of kind of showing you an overview of what's going on and talking about how this stuff has been done in the past.
Yeah, see, there's no like digging into it. There's no expansion or anything and actually drilling down into anything. It's just this shallow analysis is good. It kind of shows me that your analysis is also quite shallow, unfortunately.
And it's being done again in an effort to try to gain power by...
It's being done again, is it? By what measure? Because it's on the face of it a similar action? That doesn't make any sense.
By making enemies out of us and discriminating.
Like, at what point are we not doing a fucking Hitler drank water argument? It's just ridiculous.
Against people. Now, I'm not going to read this whole article right here, but we're about to talk about the gender-affirming care ban for minors. And so I wanted to go ahead and highlight this right here. Fewer than 0.1% of U.S. adolescents receive gender-affirming medications, report find. As U.S. lawmakers debate issues around healthcare for transgender youth, it's been difficult to determine the number of young people receiving gender-affirming medication.
What's 0.1% of U.S. adolescents? 420,000, 42,000. There's 42,000 teenagers receiving gender-affirming medications, you're saying. That's still a fair amount of people. Still a lot of people that might change their mind. If you're going to look at studies that say that a lot of these kids might desist, that might just naturally grow out of it if they go through puberty, the number is like 60-something%, potentially. It's a heck of a lot of people.
Leaving room for exaggerated and false claims. Now, a medical journal has published the most reliable estimate yet, and the numbers are low, reflecting more clearly on medical practices now being weighed by the U.S. Supreme Court. Fewer than 1 in 1,000 U.S. adolescents with commercial insurance received gender-affirming medications, puberty blockers, or...
I've noticed none of those content creators actually read the laws that are written. They didn't ban transgender care, withholding federal funds. Yeah, I mean, that Council of Geeks person at least, like, acknowledged something to do with that, but for the most part, it's such a weird...
Exaggerated and false claims. Now,
and the thing is, if you're saying there's not very many of them, that doesn't mean that they should allow it. That's got really nothing to do with whether it's good or not, you know what I mean? This is like a pivot, it's like a way of slipping away without actually dealing with the argument.
Medical journal has published the most reliable...
That says to me if you can pay for it, it's still legal. Well, yeah.
Estimate yet, and the numbers are low, reflecting more clearly on medical practices now being weighed by the U.S. Supreme Court. Fewer than 1 in 1,000 U.S. adolescents with commercial insurance received gender-affirming medications. Puberty
with commercial insurance. So does that mean that that's not even entirely representative? I'm not sure.
Blockers or hormones during a recent 5-year period, according to a study released Monday. At least 26 states have adopted
during a 5-year period. Okay, I'm not sure what the number would be. That's still a fair amount of people. And just because there's not very many of them, that doesn't mean that you should just let it happen. You know what I mean? It's the same thing people do with like the sports thing. Well, there aren't many trans athletes. Well, then how many is too many? There aren't many adolescents on gender-affirming medications. Well, then how many is too many, you know?
Adopted laws restricting or banning gender-affirming medical care for transgender minors, and most of those states face lawsuits. A decision by the Supreme Court in a Tennessee case is expected later this year. President-elect Donald Trump has promised to roll back protections for transgender people. We are not seeing inappropriate use of this sort of care, said lead author Landon Hughes, a Harvard University public health researcher, and it's certainly not happening at the rate at which people think it is.
We're not seeing an inappropriate use. What does that mean? What constitutes to you inappropriate use of gender-affirming medications? when you have no way of knowing which children are actually dealing with gender dysphoria that is going to persist into adulthood. And for those that it doesn't persist, they're like forever affected by this.
Researchers analyzed a large insurance claims database covering more than 5 million patients ages 8 to 17. Only 926 adolescents with a gender more than which people think it is. The researchers analyzed a large insurance claims database.
The number is misleading. Yeah. Yeah, it's always going to be misleading, but irrespective, if we're saying it's not very many, that still doesn't mean that they should allow it. That still doesn't mean it's okay. It doesn't deal at all with the actual application of that medication. And someone in Harvard, sorry, I'm saying it wrong, saying, oh, we don't see any inappropriate use of it. Well, how would you know? How would you know? The only way you tell is whether they persisted with it or not. And even then, you don't know if that's going to make them happy. And when we see like the suicide rates being what they are, it suggests that this isn't a very good way of dealing with gender dysphoria anyway, because it's not going to alleviate it completely, or it's going to help make your life worse in some way. And we can't just say that everything is to do with transphobia. We can't just say that suicide rates are due to transphobia.
Covering more than 5 million patients ages 8 to 17. Only 926 adolescents with a gender-related diagnosis received puberty blockers from 2018 through 2022. That's through that diagnosis, 5 million patients. The researchers analyzed a large not seeing inappropriate use of this sort of care, said lead author Landon Hughes, a Harvard University public health researcher, and it's certainly not happening at the rate at which people think it is. The researchers analyzed a large insurance claims database covering more than 5 million patients ages 8 to 17. Only 926 adolescents with a gender-related diagnosis received puberty blockers from 2018 through 2022. That's through that entire period, only 926.
That doesn't address whether it's a good thing that that's happening or not.
During that time, 1,900.
How many would be too many for you? What if the number was bigger? What would your argument be then?
127 received hormones.
Is this going to be one of those, it's not happening, and if it is, it's good actually? Because, I don't know. That shows to me that it's bullshit, because you'll just find any excuse to be like, oh, it's fine actually. And then if the number gets bigger, you just go to a different argument and say, oh, well, it's fine actually because of this. It's like, well, I don't know. Shouldn't you talk about stuff in principle occasionally? It doesn't seem like people want to talk about things in principle. They want to rush straight to like the supposed practical aspect of it, which isn't really always the point. And it's not really what you do, why you apply laws to stuff. Like laws, are they not supposed to be about like the principle rather than what's happening? Because what's happening is always changing anyway. It could get worse and worse and worse until it does become a problem.
Findings published in JAMA Pediatrics suggest that fewer than 0.1% of all youth in the database receive these medications.
0.1% of the youth in the database.
Researchers found that no patients under the age of 12 were prescribed hormones and indicated.
Well, what the fuck is a kid under the age of 12 going to do with hormones? Almost none of them have started puberty anyway. Like, kinda no shit, you know what I mean? Obviously.
That doctors are appropriately cautious about when to start such treatments. So this article is really important because it shows
appropriately cautious, but there is no way of screening who actually has gender dysphoria and who actually is going to have lasting gender dysphoria. There's no way of knowing who might not just desist if they go through puberty.
Shows us that the research is in, and this is not some massive social contagion. This is not something affecting millions.
Is not some massive social contagion. Like, I don't know, anyone that's saying that millions of kids are on this is wrong. Like, that's not really the charge. And I mean, yeah, lots of people are taking on this identity without actually medicalizing or not getting to it because of the wait times and stuff, because not everyone is well off enough. But none of this means that it should be happening. And what they're saying is that the fact that not many of them are medicalizing is proof that it's not a social contagion. Well, ultimately where it starts from is an identity. So you'd have to pinpoint whether the identity is a social contagion or not, if you want to be honest about this. Like, you can't really say a treatment isn't socially contagious. Because yeah, no, obviously a treatment can't be fucking socially contagious. It's the people that are seeking the treatment that you got to look at. Not really a very sensible argument here.
Of children across the US. This is something affecting under 1,000.
So annoying, that scriptive. It's not happening. Okay, it's happening barely, so don't care about it. Okay, it's happening a lot, but actually it's a good thing because blah. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, if you're earnest in your beliefs, you don't just change them every time your previous point gets debunked. You know what I mean? Like, you should be starting with the it's a good thing if you're being honest. But it kind of seems like they don't think about it that way. They just find the first thing they can that debunks it and then stick with that. But the problem is that tends to beg further questions like, well, what if it was more people? And then if they go on to a different argument, well, it's like, well, why did you make the first argument then? You know what I mean? It's really dodgy and it suggests dishonesty to me.
1,000 or maybe slightly over 1,000 children, like in terms of medical treatments. Like this is something they are focusing all this hate on such a small population of people.
They're focusing hate on people that get gender-affirming medications. That is not true at all. You're like losing it here, man. Like, focusing hate on people that get affirming medication. Like, it's not even focusing hate to begin with. That's a crazy framing of it. Like, yeah, they're focusing on this like trans stuff because it's a massive concern. Like, you get these issues that don't affect many people, but become massive deals. And part of the reason for that is all this like trans visibility. And the fact that kids are now learning about being trans, meaning that they're getting their heads filled with stuff behind their parents' backs. Parents are going to get concerned about that. Like, that's just how it is, because they don't know if their kids are actually trans, or if they learned something at school that they took on because they're a bit impressionable. Wild.
Well, it's absurd. And I think that if the right-wing grifters were to honestly confront this stuff, it would make all of their arguments seem incredibly stupid.
No, because you're just saying it's not very many of them. That doesn't deal with the actual concept of children taking on trans identities and seeking out this treatment, whether they get it or not. You're just saying who's actually getting it. But we hear about like wait times and stuff like that. Like, would you not complain about wait times in a different video, surely? So then you're acknowledging that there's a lot more people that want this medication than what actually gets them. And the social contagion is not being medicalized for something, because that's nonsensical. The social contagion is about the identity. So like, we're mixing up fucking all kinds of arguments in a blender here. It's quite bizarre. And it comes off dishonest because you're too focused on the actual amount of people doing it. Well, not many people doing it is a problem. Well, then what happens when they are more people doing it? It's the same with sports. How many trans athletes in women's sports is going to be too much? What happens if there's more male athletes and female athletes in trans sports, in women's sports, sorry. Bearing in mind men's sports is all male athletes. It suggests dishonesty. And it's impossible like to get answers on this stuff because they just talk to themselves. What right-wing grifters has this person ever spoken to?
It's like when you do research on transgender.
They introduced all this new stuff in schools about trans, so people responded. It's not picking them picking on a minority. It's a response to a change that wasn't agreed upon. Yeah, exactly. Like, the trans kids thing, it freaks parents out. That's like the one thing you don't want to do, is freak people out about what it sounds like you might want to do with their kid. You know what I mean? Like, leaving kids alone is like the cornerstone of fucking everything. People don't want their kids being indoctrinated into weird religions. People don't want their kids, it being suggested they should have sex with adults. That's disgusting. People don't want their kids being suggested that they might be trans and then completely fuck their life up potentially because they're going to realize later on that it wasn't right for them. And history is potentially going to speak extremely unkindly on this person for the things that they're saying right now. Because what happens if in 10 years we get this wave of like young girls that like they got to like 19 or 20 and start realizing I can't have kids or I can't breastfeed my kids. And I made that decision when I was like 12 or 13 or some shit. Someone in the previous video said trans people are 1% of the population. 1 in 1,000 is 0.1. So by their own stats, every 10th child that goes for it gets gender-affirming medication. Yeah, Jesus.
transgender athletes, and you find out that in some of these states where they pass these bans, there are no transgender athletes.
You see what I mean? So then what happens if there are? What happens if there's too many? You just find the first argument you can that debunks it in your mind and gives you cause to make this conspiracy theory up, despite the fact that no one fucking wants trans people in sports, except trans people. And even then, plenty of us don't. Like, why would they just do laws based on whether there's many people doing this thing? If there's only 0.1% of a population stealing, does that mean they should just ignore stealing? Or should they still have laws that reflect the principles of the land as per what the government says? You know what I mean? It's crazy. And it's a sign of a very dishonest person, quite frankly. You just pick the first thing you can go to that debunks it. So what happens when it's more than them then? What happens if female sports starts being overrun by males? What then?
Athletes. Like, there are some states where they're passing these laws to ban trans athletes, and there's like one trans athlete in the entire state.
Yeah, this is a nonsense point. That doesn't matter. What matters is whether you think that males should be allowed in female sports and why. The number of people currently doing it doesn't fucking matter. Like, by that logic, do you then leave things until they become problems? Why wouldn't you deal with the problem at the root of it?
Or something. And it's like, why are we spending our effort focusing on this when there are real things?
Spending our effort. He wrote a fucking... he signed an executive order. What effort? And it's like, why are we spending this effort? But what if it gets more? You know what I mean?
That need to be fixed. Like, our country has real problems. So focusing on
those women who will be 19, 20 years old will probably come out about all the abuse they suffered at the hands of their gender-affirming parents. It's going to be a tragic sight to see.
Yeah, we're going to hear some of that shit. Thank you, Asami Yamazaki. Hope you're good.
all this energy on targeting such a minority of people is absurd. It's a distraction from the more important issues. Okay, so now we're going to focus on resistance and like what's happening to try to fight back against these executive orders. So here we are, families sue to block Trump's executive order barring gender-affirming care. Trump cannot withhold federal funds that have been previously authorized by Congress, the lawsuit states. 7 families of transgender children are suing to block President Donald Trump's executive order barring healthcare facilities from providing gender-affirming care to trans youth, claiming the order is unconstitutionally trying to block funds already allocated to those providers. The lawsuit was filed on Tuesday in a federal court in Baltimore, Maryland. The families are being represented by the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, Lambda Legal, PFLAG, and GLMA. The suit alleges that Trump's recent executive order, which seeks to withhold federal funds to health centers that provide gender-affirming care to patients under the age of 19.
I'm bored. I find this very dishonest. We're just reading articles and agreeing with them. I should probably do the same, and then I'll get 12.5k subscribers in 6 months and get ads on my videos and earn money doing this. But I don't, so that's how it goes. How nice. How nice. I want to watch The Line.